Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition. Really is a special edition. I didn't think we'd ever see this day, but here we are. A breaking news day where we know now that Donald Trump is a felon. He's been found guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying the business records. It's not a federal court. It isn't. That's definitely the case, but it still sticks, and it is a felony charge. All 34 counts of falsifying the business records meant the jury was unanimous. It means that the prosecution did a incredible job, which we all thought, while looking from the outside in, it felt like it all made sense to us. I felt the other day that the conviction was coming, and here it is, completely convicted now on all 34 counts. Now, his defense did not do a very good job. They will appeal. No doubt they'll appeal and object to absolutely everything. But still, the facts remain the same. This former president of the United States is now going to be running for the presidency again as a convict. There's nothing more dramatic in terms of changing the perceptions in terms of America than this, because up until now, it's been very easy for Fox News and the other elements of the right-wing echo chamber to hide this news, to hide information about what Donald Trump really did when he stole the elections in 2016. And now they can't. They can no longer do that. This is really what I've been saying on my show and recently, and what I've been saying here on the air, is this is a subversion of democracy. This is what we really are seeing, is a subversion of democracy that happened in 2016. He should never have won the 2016 election. Had things gone the way they normally would, had he not paid Stormy Daniels the $130,000 in hush money, then he would not have been president. So by paying her that, by breaking the law and paying her that money, which is what he was found guilty of today, he stole the elections from the American people. He stole the elections from Hillary Clinton. And we know now that for the next 4 years, what we've landed up with was a tragedy, an absolute grotesque presidency, which we will never, ever be able to completely erase from the minds of so many people, because it cost us so many deaths in terms of coronavirus. It caused us so much stress. It's caused the entire world to be worried about the alliances which underpin the safety and security of the world. And so that one act of paying $130,000 to a former porn star might seem like, why is that so significant? Why is this now a felony? Why is it 34 counts of a felony? It's because he stole the elections. It was illegal, and everything that followed from there, including the current SCOTUSes who are installed by him, they don't deserve to be there. They're not legally there. So if he had an illegal election in 2016, all the people that he appointed to those positions shouldn't be in those positions at all. There's probably a really good argument for the three of them that have now been added to the three new justices in the Supreme Court. They shouldn't be there. They should not be there. The big news this evening, 34 felony charges, and he's been found guilty on all of them. There was some understanding today after it was almost 9 hours of deliberation today. We all thought that perhaps there would be some sort of hung jury, that people would come back not feeling like they can fully convict him because there was some question around one particular person's credibility, and that is Michael Cohen's credibility. That was certainly what the defense said. The defense said, I think what I was just to underline what I was saying here, that this is really a point or day where, Michael Cohen, of all people, can feel very vindicated. This man who certainly has had his reputation dragged through the mud by so many people, there's no one who can say that Michael Cohen has been left unaffected by this. It's truly remarkable that we're seeing this day even happen. Michael Cohen was thought of as a liar. He was accused by the defense of being this full-scale liar, of a man who could not be trusted, whose entire history as the fixer for Donald Trump. Those were all massive allegations made against Michael Cohen. And yet today, he is vindicated. I've certainly been very critical of Michael Cohen in my time here at Narativ, because I covered everything he did when he was Donald Trump's fixer. There's a lot to say about Michael Cohen and his actions and the things he has not yet atoned for. There are many things he still has to say, has to come out and say clearly what he did and why he did it. But in terms of vindication in this case, he's been vindicated to some extent. You can say now that this was the case that he really wanted to be seen come to trial. It is the one that landed up defeating all the attempts by the Trump machine, by the enemies of democracy, to stall, to delay. The New York state justice system is the one that seems to have held up the most. It's the one that today convicted the former President Donald Trump for the first time in history, guilty on all 34 counts. That is a remarkable vindication for Michael Cohen. I think that's why they did win the case, is that they did not hang it entirely on Michael Cohen. They hung this case more on David Pecker, that they were looking for corroborating evidence around Michael Cohen. And clearly the jury found the corroborating evidence that they needed. Specifically, it seemed, around that initial meeting that took place I think in August of 2015, when Trump, Pecker, and Michael Cohen sat in a meeting in Trump Tower. And they asked David Pecker what he could do to help the campaign. And he said he would be the eyes and ears of the campaign, looking out for any damaging stories. He would print only favorable stories about Donald Trump and the campaign, and then he'd print negative stories about his opponents. And I've reported, and I think this is an underreported element of this, that he did the same thing for Bill Clinton, and to rubbish Bill Clinton's name and to damage the Hillary Clinton campaign by linking Bill Clinton to the Jeffrey Epstein. That particular smear campaign against Bill Clinton was orchestrated by Donald Trump, David Pecker, and the National Enquirer, and designed to hurt the Hillary Clinton campaign in its most dramatic way as possible. And it's done so throughout the years. And when you think about QAnon, when you think about that horrific campaign by the GOP and the enemies of democracy to paint the entire Democratic Party as pedophiles, as part of this international network of child trafficking, all of that comes from these same places, comes from the National Enquirer painting Bill Clinton, painting Oprah Winfrey and others as being part of this child sex ring. That's all where this came from. So what we're seeing now today is a confirmation that the jury, in fact, agrees that this was a subversion of democracy, that what happened on that day when they made that deal, when Michael Cohen was witness and took part in a negotiation between David Pecker and Donald Trump to overthrow the will of the people by lying to them through the pages of the National Enquirer, by making illegal contributions to the campaign of Donald J. As you check out of every grocery store, you see the National Enquirer. So every time someone is checking out, they're seeing these headlines, they're making an impression on the voters. And indeed, those voters believed it. And there'd be no reason not to believe it. That's the newspaper, right? And by believing it, they also helped elect an illegitimate president. And this is the story that must now be told by the media. And it's important that right-wing media acknowledge this. They are too part of this incredible machine that has been feeding disinformation to the American people. And today we got a jury to unanimously convict on 34 counts. And yes, it's about falsifying business records, but the goal was to subvert the elections. And that really is the most critical thing that you have to take away from this. We're expecting Alvin Bragg to speak at 6:30. That'll be in the middle of the sub-hour newscasts. That man originally didn't want to bring this case. It took a lot of convincing, as far as I'm told, to bring this case, and yet he did. He persevered. He did what he needed to do. It says on the chat here, Gills1 says the Manhattan wannabe from Queens gets his due. Indeed, it is interesting to note that the guy from Queens, the guy who said to us that he could, I think, murder anybody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. He hasn't got away with it now. You're watching Narativ Live. This is a tremendous day, a momentous day in history, as we're watching Donald Trump guilty, convicted now on all 34 felony charges. We'll be right back in just 30 seconds. I have been personally fighting for this moment for, I think, 8 years. I think the group of us that started as innocent information and media types 8 years ago, I was just starting a news venture 8 years ago, and thought, here's an interesting story. Let me try cover Trump Russia, because I didn't know what it was. It wasn't at that stage even called Trump Russia. I was just, let's try it. Let's do it. And we started investigating why Donald Trump became president. And many hundreds of blog posts later, it was clear that Donald Trump was a Russian asset. It was clear to me that he was operating under the help of a criminal organization around the world that was pursuing the destruction of America, that there was an enemies of democracy coalition between nation states, which included both our enemies and our friends, who had over the years amassed an incredible amount of resources that they were going to bring to bear against America in order to destroy America, because democracy was looking unkind to them. It was not looking like they were going to be allowed to continue their criminality and their complete disregard for human rights that we've seen repeatedly from the dictatorship class, if you'd like to call them that. Well, democracy was beginning to be too much of a challenge for them. Got Donald Trump for that. And I certainly had 8 years of my life change, because suddenly I was the person, amongst many others, trying to prosecute a case against this man in the public. And there were not many people like us, because the mainstream media as well was co-opted by the information, was co-opted by these criminals. And so for me, this is an incredible day, because it actually brings justice back to our lives. We have not seen justice in America for a long time. We keep seeing these Supreme Court rulings that make no sense. We keep seeing rights being taken away from us. We've not been seeing just America. We're seeing the delays in the federal cases that have meant that things like January 6th have not been prosecuted, that have meant that the Mar-a-Lago case has not been prosecuted, the espionage case in Mar-a-Lago. This man was acting on behalf of our foreign adversaries, of our enemies, to steal the secrets of the United States and hand them over to our enemies. That is what Donald Trump has been doing and did do. And so to imagine that this is the conviction for a hush money case, but it is conviction of his ethics. It's a conviction of his criminality, of the way he thinks. And I'd be surprised, quite frankly, if he runs for office. I think there's a real possibility that he doesn't make it to the presidency with all this baggage, because it's impossible now, I believe, even though they will try, for the Fox News machine and others to say this is just a junk case. This is not a junk case. This is the case which underpins how Donald Trump stole the elections from Hillary Clinton, which underpins how we lost our bit of democracy. Everyone in 2016 lost their vote because we didn't get the vote that we deserved and that we voted for. We were taken over by the lowest common denominator of our country in some ways in making Donald Trump the president in that election. That was when we lost our democracy. And it's good to see us having regained it partially through Joe Biden's election. But now we need to get him reelected. And there's still a big road ahead of us. So I feel pretty good that after 8 years of telling everybody this man is a criminal, that this man is a danger, a clear and present danger to our society, that he is nothing more than a Russian asset at the very least, that he's beholden to China, to Russia, to Saudi Arabia, to so many others. And now we have some vindication of that. So let me tell you, the Biden campaign has put out a statement saying that no one is above the law. Donald Trump has always mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. Michael Tyler, the campaign communications director, said in a statement, "But today's verdict does not change the fact that the American people face a simple reality. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. Convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president." So they've just answered my question there. It looks like they think he's still going to be running for president. And if he is, we have a lot of work to do to explain to the rest of America who might vote for him as to why it just makes no sense. The enemies of democracy that have been attacking America, that gave us Donald Trump, continue to attack America. It is in China's most interest and in Russia's biggest interest to see Donald Trump get reelected. It opens the door to so much of what they desire. By all means, this is a state of time. We can finally take some of the air out of their echo chamber that they've been able to perpetrate through Fox News and the National Enquirer and God knows what else is out there, just pummeling Americans with news that is not really accurate, that is not true. And Americans still need to be convinced that what they're getting out of their TV diet and their media diet is incorrect. And I include Twitter, certainly Facebook amongst that. So the statement that I just read you marks the first time the Biden campaign has officially directed comments on the court proceedings. They've been very quiet up until this time, as the former president has accused without evidence Biden and his administration of bringing this case against him for political gain. And we're going to hear that again and again. I'm sure there is no doubt that Donald Trump will appear shortly or whenever he's allowed to, and he will do what he's done before. He will tell us all that this was an illegal witch hunt. This has been a campaign by Biden and his woke liberals to go after him. But in reality, that is not the case. In reality, we saw a very fair trial here where he was given every opportunity, including an opportunity to testify, and he chose not to. And anyone who's observed this case up closely knows there is just nothing that would have got him out of this case because he did the crime. He just did. And you can't walk away from that. Certainly, the jury and that was a very quick deliberation. We saw, 9 hours today? But this is a tremendously historic day. There's no doubt about it. We are living history. We are seeing for the first time in American history what we've all come to believe in our lives. I mean, we've all believed that there is a rule in America that no person is above the law. And now we know that to be absolutely true. And what a remarkable thing for America to be in this state of mind, under all this pressure, under all this attacks from our foreign entities, to be able to be vindicated at this time is quite remarkable. As we approach 6 p.m., The evening supper hour newscasts are about to say to America and to the world that Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 felony charges that were laid against him by the district attorney in Manhattan, who has now got the most incredible bragging rights. Alvin Bragg will be, as it were, able to go out at 6:30 this evening when he does a press conference, and we'll cover that for you here. He'll be able to say what many of us believe, that this is a remarkable thing. He did not have to bring this case. He, the beginning, chose not to bring this case, but now he was convinced by people like Donald Trump, by people like Michael Cohen to bring this case, and he in fact has brought the case. And look at this, such vindication for him, for his office. He was in fact elected on this very, very issue, that he was going to bring some justice to Donald Trump. So guilty on all counts. That's the big headline. He'll be sentenced on July 11th. Can you believe that? July 11th, he'll be sentenced. They're not looking to give him bail in this case either. What we're going to see, I don't know what that really means. I think they are not looking to give him bail because they don't want to imprison him right now. He could be sentenced to prison in July. Now, he may not be. This is the lowest of all felony types of crimes that you can have. So as the judge pointed out the other day, he can be found to be guilty, but also on all 34 counts, he could also just get what would amount to a slap on the wrist from the judge. There's no real minimum amount of jail time. And it's hard to imagine the former president of the United States is going to be spending any time behind bars anytime soon. But certainly this is going to break badly as his entire base hopefully now finds out what he's been up to. This guy did not, it's not paying money to keep a tryst quiet. That's not what this is. This was a subversion of democracy. This was an attempt to steal the election in 2016, and a successful attempt. For all the bravos that Michael Cohen is going to get over the next few months and years, yeah, there's a lot to be said about the fact that he was able to bring a case against Donald Trump. But his involvement and Donald Trump's involvement in bringing down our democratic system by illegally maneuvering to become the president of the United States, by buying the story, by conniving and agreeing to a pact with the National Enquirer, which ultimately was publishing total lies to the American public throughout the entire election, and which ultimately brought down this campaign. It is a dramatic, brought down the Hillary Clinton campaign and gave him the victory by a small margin, but still, that's the victory he needed to become president in November of 2016. It's not a small matter. What we're seeing today is certainly the vindication of many people's work. So for the last 8 years, we've seen many people come and go in this fight to bring justice to Donald Trump. I still speak to people today that tell me that maybe they'll vote for Donald Trump. And I'm like, how are you going to vote for this man? Like, you have no memory of what happened in those 4 years in 2016. But indeed, people don't. And indeed, people choose to forget. People have their reservations about Joe Biden because they've been fed a propaganda diet in just the same way that Donald Trump was able to manipulate the electorate in 2016 to win that vote. Guess what? It's still happening today. All the doubts that people are being given, all the doubts and criticisms of Joe Biden, it comes from the same machine. And it's hard. It's hard to know where that machine really is. How is it amplifying to us? How is it getting to us? So when you hear your friends and neighbors doubting Joe Biden, it's not because every president has something to criticize, but the propaganda that is being fed to Americans is so universal and gets to you in such an underhanded way, because you're hearing it second, third hand from your friends, from your neighbors. You're not hearing it directly from the source. So you can say, hey, that's the National Enquirer. I don't believe the National Enquirer. Instead, you're hearing it from a friend of a friend, or a friend of a friend who says that their relative saw something and therefore Joe Biden can't be a good president. When in reality, Joe Biden is doing a remarkable job against this giant international conspiracy to destroy America, which is really what I've been underlining for the last few years, that Donald Trump is representative of the enemies of democracy. He is here to destroy America from within. And I think we saw that in the way he handled coronavirus. I think we saw that in the way he handled NATO. We see it today in how he talks about being a dictator on day one. We see it in the way he intends to allow Vladimir Putin to march all the way across Europe, to allow Xi to take Taiwan, you name it. There is so much going on a national and international scale that Donald Trump is promising that we are in the hands, potentially, of a massive transnational criminal organization taking over the United States. And we've already been there for 4 years, as we were in 2016. and we would be there again if he's elected again. So keep in mind, as we're watching all this tonight, this is not just about Stormy Daniels, about Michael Cohen, about the hush money. This is really about democracy. This is about the system of democracy, the rule of law, standing up and finally doing what it needed to do many years ago, if you ask me, but at least finally doing what it needed to do, and at least making it clear that it is convicting Donald Trump on all 34 counts. Now, sentencing still to come. There are two other big cases which should be heard, honestly, before we get to election day. We probably won't hear from them because the January 6th trial is being held up by the Supreme Court, and the Mar-a-Lago espionage case is being held up by a corrupt judge. But it is time for this signal. This jury has signaled to the rest of America, these are ordinary citizens, that they want justice in the cases of Donald Trump. And in fact, just as it's important for us to hear how he stole the 2016 election using Stormy Daniels, it's just as important that we hear about him about how he tried to steal the elections in 2021 when the insurrection took place and how they organized that. And it's just as important that we hear about what happened in the espionage case. Let's dip in here for a second to MSNBC and see what's going on their front page here on the
ability today. He is now a convicted felon in his one-time home state of New York.
And he's been convicted of 34 felonies. And he is not just a former president. He is the Republican Party's nominee for president. I will go back to a point I made earlier, which is that I think the Republican Party has a decision to make now as to whether or not it is okay to be convicted of 34 felonies and still hold the nomination of that party for their presidency. For the presidency, he is the presumptive nominee. He is not the official nominee of that party. They can choose somebody else at this point. And if these felony convictions mean what they have always meant for everybody else in U.S. history who has encountered the criminal justice system while they were also standing for political office, the Republican Party will take that seriously and may reconsider that matter. But
Can I ask you a question about
that?
Yes, on that, this trial was about, its hinge point was the release of the Access Hollywood tape, which was the last time they went, do we want to do this? And they said yes.
Yeah.
So what are your...
I've been thinking about that because once I absorbed the sort of shock of the unanimous 34 guilty verdicts, the next thing I started to think about was the closing from Joshua Steinglass, the prosecutor. Because in his closing, I just pulled this part of the transcript, he said to the jury, I suggest to you that the value of this corrupt bargain forged at this Trump Tower meeting, which was the meeting where they set up the catch and kill scheme, cannot be overstated. It turned out to be one of the most valuable contributions anyone ever made to the Trump campaign. When you put all of these components together, this scheme cooked up by these men at this time could very well be what got President Trump elected. Hearing that, the jury then went into the jury room, deliberated, and decided on all 34 counts we are going to find him guilty. The case put to them by the prosecution was that Donald Trump likely became president in the first place because of these dozens of felonies he committed in order to defraud the public, in order to get elected.
And I just want to say something about the jury here, because there's a writer I really love, Osito Onevo, and he's made this point before. He said, when you take a step back, the only people that have held Donald Trump truly accountable have been ordinary people. They didn't vote for him the first time around. They kicked him out of office the second time around. And in two different juries, random folks, literally off the street, more or less drawn from a machine that's popping out numbers and addresses in a civil trial and in this trial, came together, reasoned with each other as equal citizens, and said, yeah, he did it. The whole time we've been lectured about how you don't understand Trump's appeal and that he's really the tribune of the vote of the people and you elites and liberals. No, people, real people, our fellow citizens at every hinge point, important hinge point, have rejected the man or in this case, found him plainly guilty of the thing that he plainly did.
Why? Why do you think?
I just have a lot of faith in people. I don't want to overstate the case. Bad people can be elected. It's not like some foolproof system. And juries can return wrong verdicts. And we've seen that. One of the things I think is tricky in our discussion to this is not to paint the majesty of the law.
Right, don't follow the moment out the window.
Yeah, like it's a complicated and often remorseless system that we have constructed here in America of criminal justice.
But would you say that's true for rich white people?
No, generally it is not.
With three experienced defense counsel?
That's the other thing. I said this on my show last night, and I really felt it and stood by it today as we were preparing the jury is, to me, the process was itself a monumental achievement.
So Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts in this incredible case, even though some of us, me included, certainly at the beginning, did not feel like this was the case we wanted to see Donald Trump be brought to justice over. The other two cases seem so much more formidable, the espionage case, the insurrection case. But a case is a case, and this is a felony, and we're glad to take it because, as Rachel Maddow was just pointing out there, what seemed to us like just like a hush money case in the beginning. You were talking about, was this particular charge or this particular crime that important to bring a former president in front of a courtroom and to charge him for it? But as the prosecution came to the conclusion in front of the jury, as they were making their arguments there, the clear and very big ramifications of what happened because of that Stormy Daniels payoff, the hush money payoff, became very apparent. And you heard Rachel talk about it there. But just to underline what she was saying, this is from our coverage in my latest podcast, which is available now wherever you get your podcasts, also on this Twitter feed and on YouTube. The prosecutor described the meeting as three rich and powerful men high up in tower trying to control the flow of information that might reach the voters. Now, that flow of information, it really, that phrase really triggered me yesterday to try and understand exactly what kind of flow changed. And the whole news flow of that last few weeks of the election campaign dramatically shifted because of this payoff to Stormy Daniels. Donald Trump is a very frugal man. He would only have made this payment if he knew if it was going to help him, and indeed it was going to help him. So as we're just watching there, I think this is Trump probably leaving. There he is. Isn't that incredible? These are the actual images now of Donald Trump at 6:15 p.m.
Campaign staff was abandoning him when Senator...
He's waving to whoever he's waving to, saying thank you, and looking like he's just the king of the world, isn't he? He certainly is got an interesting election up ahead of him, trying to convince the people that he can win. Do you think he's actually waving at anyone in particular, or is he just waving? It's hard to tell if the crowd there are friendly or unfriendly.
Donald Trump's face as the
he's now turned around and back like he's walking. I can't tell exactly the location there. Looks to me like he's heading back to Trump Tower, where I'm sure he'll have quite the night trying to figure out what to do next. I'm really curious to see if people like Schwartzman of Blackstone are still going to be pouring the money that they promised that they did pour into his campaign, because I don't see that they will. It looks to me like it's going to be hard for people who are publicly listed companies. Not just a hush money case. This is not just about $130,000. It's not about falsifying documents. It's really about what Joshua Steinglass, the prosecutor, said to the jury ahead of their closing, during the closing. He said about all these three men, Steinglass said, knew that women would be coming forward with accounts of sexual liaisons with Trump. Pecker, this is David Pecker, he said, agreed to be the eyes and ears of the campaign, using his perch at the time as publisher of the National Enquirer to catch and kill their stories and protect Trump's White House bid. That line there, protect the White House bid, is so significant because what they did, according to Steinglass, is use the catch and kill, which is the purchase of stories and then not publishing those stories, in order to help Donald Trump become the president of the United States. This is a quote. "It was a subversion of democracy," Steinglass said, adding that fair elections hinge on voters having access to important information about candidates. The purpose of the meeting was to deny that access, he said, to pull the wool over their eyes in a coordinated fashion. So there was a coordinated campaign to hide the truth from American voters, to subvert the democracy, to deny them the normal access to the flow of information, which you'd normally expect during elections, which would allow you to make a decision about who to vote for. And then he said this incredible line, the alleged scheme, Steinglass said, could very well be what got President Trump elected. And that really got me to thinking, this is all about the period of time between the Access Hollywood tapes and the election itself, the election day itself. Everyone thought at the time that would be the end of these elections, that there would be no ways that Donald Trump could win this election with the kind of talk that he engaged with Billy Bush from Access Hollywood. It was a off-the-record conversation, but it was recorded by cameras inside one of the tour buses, and it was disgusting. We all remember what he said. he said that he was willing to grab women by their genitals. It's tawdry, it's disgusting, but this is Hollywood, and this is the way Hollywood often works. We're often seeing this kind of interplay in Hollywood. And it's dramatic and interesting to imagine that he and Billy Bush were having this conversation about grabbing women by the genitals, and yet they got away with it. And why did they get away with it? Why this story, which should have taken the entire election campaign of Donald Trump down, and it did not. Why did that happen? It happened because two things immediately happened. Firstly, the GRU, which is the Russian intelligence services, immediately stepped in, and they countered almost the Access Hollywood news story, the grab them by the you-know-what story, and they countered it with releasing selected emails from the hacked servers of the Democratic National Congress. And by doing that, they were able to grab some more attention, and they stuck it. Remember, that was all you heard for months. Hillary Clinton and her emails. What about her emails? Truthfully, that was all a coordinated intelligence operation, really designed to propagate a story which wasn't true, that Hillary Clinton had somehow mishandled these secrets and was untrustworthy and was responsible for all these terrible things. When in fact, she did nothing of the sort. She did have a server at home, and yes, there were issues around that, but certainly not worthy of any serious national damage. And then, so it's a surprise to everyone that Jim Comey comes out suddenly saying, hey, we've got Anthony Weiner's laptop and it has her emails on it. Still unclear about how her emails got on there. And he came out and said, we're not sure about these. We're going to have to go through all of these emails. When in reality, he was sure. And I'm surprised that during his recent tour, no one asked him about this. No single journalist that I was aware of asked him, how did that happen? How did we land up with Anthony Weiner's emails out there? Because that whole laptop, they had it for a while. There's no indication that these emails were any different than the ones that the FBI had previously looked at. But nevertheless, the FBI chose to inject itself into the election campaign in those last 2 weeks on behalf of Donald Trump. And that is how many people believe Donald Trump got to become the president of the United States. It's the scenario of the Access Hollywood tapes coming out, grab her by the what? It was described as a Category 5 by Hope Hicks, the communications director for Donald Trump. And then right afterwards, you had the GRU countering that exposure by releasing the hacked emails from the DNC documents that they had hacked. This is, we know, a true story. This is what Mueller found out in his investigation. We had many GRU assets and intelligence agents were named in the indictments. We know that Roger Stone was coordinating with Guccifer, however you might say it, who was a middleman between the GRU and the public, if you want. And that also they were coordinating how this was all going to be released publicly on WikiLeaks. So all of that was timed and coordinated with the election campaign of Donald Trump. Out of the Access Hollywood, grab her by the you-know-whats, you got the GRU releasing the hacked DNC documents in coordination with the Roger Stone and the Trump campaign. That is how we got that news story about her, grab her by the, that's how we got it taken out of the attention of the world, because suddenly there was this new thread that was thrown in, this new October surprise that was thrown in. It was all going to be about the hacked DNC documents. And just to make an underlining statement about that, we heard from Jim Comey that Hillary Clinton's emails had been discovered on Anthony Weiner's laptop, and that there was questions about it that would need to investigate whether national security was in any way undermined. Wow, what a set of circumstances that would ultimately, in that last weekend, because remember, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. In that last weekend, we found out that Donald Trump was going to win. And what took him over the top was this event right here of the GRU releasing the hacked emails, and Jim Comey ultimately coming on the air and saying what he did about the emails being found on his laptop being a big issue. So what changed in all of that? Let's put it very clearly here. Had it not been what we were expecting, if you were a news journalist during those days, if the normal course of life had happened, and if Stormy Daniels was not paid off by Michael Cohen and by Donald Trump, we would have had that Stormy Daniels story in those last few weeks. She was due to do an interview with ABC News, and we would have heard all about her affair, her years-long affair with Donald Trump. Instead, she took the payment. She took the $130,000. And everyone involved in that, including her and Michael Cohen, and everyone does not get to walk away and say that they weren't involved in subverting democracy. They were all involved in subverting democracy. That's not a good look for anybody, although they've vindicated themselves today to some extent. But just imagine, if you would, that story was actually still in the mix there. Just imagine what would happen if you didn't have that story bought out by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump knew he had to spend every cent he could to get that story out of the airways, because he knew that if there was any chance that story was going to come out, it would kill him with the women. That's exactly what he kept saying. He knew that women would not find this cool. They would not find it interesting. They'd be disgusted by the fact that he had any sort of relationship with the porn star, never mind that it was ongoing, never mind that it happened while his wife was pregnant with his son, never mind that he came to Trump Tower. I mean, these are all horrendous things that happened in the run-up to the 2016 election not being revealed. This is the kind of stuff that women, particular suburban women, would not have loved in any way whatsoever. He admitted, he said, hey, some guys, they might think it's okay, they might think it's cool, but the women, they were not going to vote for him. So that $130,000 secured him the vote of the women that he needed to get elected in 2016. And indeed, he did. He got elected in 2016. There's no doubt about it, because of the women who ultimately gave him a shot at this. They stepped away from Hillary Clinton. They stepped away from history, and they gave Donald Trump the election in the presidency in 2016. Now, had he not paid Stormy Daniels off for that amount of money, if he'd not paid the $130,000, you would have had the end of the election campaign looking very different. And this is what you would have seen. These 4 blue circles is what you would have seen. You'd have seen the Access Hollywood tapes, grab her by the what's, leading into the GRU releasing the hacked DNC emails. These are emails that the Russian intelligence service had hacked from the DNC, the Democratic Party, and is now publishing in concert with the campaign and with Roger Stone. That whole story, that whole narrative of the Hillary Clinton emails would have been overwhelmed by the Stormy Daniels interview had she done it with ABC, but she never did it with ABC. She was paid off $130,000. She never got to do it. She never did it with the New York Times. There was other things she was going to do. Instead, what we landed up with was the Trump campaign and all the enemies of democracy who are helping coordinate this, which includes the Russian intelligence services, includes the Bibi Netanyahu operation out of Israel, which helped coordinate the election of Donald Trump using their private intelligence services. We now know for sure that their involvement in all of this is how we landed up with the emails building up into the final election day, and Stormy Daniels not being a story on that day. That was all coordinated. And what still is questionable to me is who does David Pecker really work for? Who owns American Media Inc.? Because if it's the same people that Donald Trump appears to be beholden to, the Israelis or the Russians or the Chinese, you take your guess there, the Saudis, if that's the case, we need to know that their operations continue to be so dramatic and destabilizing to America. You see there in terms of the flow, you see there what Steinglass, the prosecutor, was saying, that this alleged scheme, which is now a confirmed scheme, a corrupt scheme, we now know it was a conspiracy, could very well be what got President Trump elected. Those are the words that Steinglass left with the jury before they entered deliberation, and it's in fact what they have found on all 34 counts to be true, and that's why he's guilty of all 34 counts. The purpose of the meeting that they initially decided to do this conspiracy was to pull the wool over their eyes in a coordinated fashion, and there implies the voters in the United States who had to rely on this fake false narrative that was built by the Russians and by Donald Trump's campaign about Hillary Clinton's emails to drive home this whole notion of the emails and Hillary Clinton being corrupt, instead of what would have been a story about Donald Trump being a serial womanizer. I should underline, that's not the only thing they did to the Hillary Clinton campaign, because of course what they did to the Hillary campaign was also this. From the ashes of the Prince Andrew story, the sex slave story that the Inquirer was so happy to publish in January of 2015, came the story about, that was Prince Andrew, of course, having a relationship with one of Jeffrey Epstein's young women, Virginia Giffrey at the time. She was young and apparently 17 at the time that she met Prince Andrew, and apparently they were involved in some sort of relationship. Now, all of that I believe to be true, and I think there's enough court evidence to prove that, and Prince Andrew has paid for that, so we certainly are aware of his admission in terms of paying for it, although I don't think he's ever publicly admitted he's guilty of a crime. Nevertheless, that story was leaked to Donald Trump, and in the weeks after that, Donald Trump went to CPAC, and he told CPAC that Bill Clinton was also going to face these tremendous difficulties about what he was doing with Jeffrey Epstein, that Bill Clinton was somehow engaged in the story related to Prince Andrew. And that's the implication from the story that's published there on the left. Bill Clinton, pedo pals, sex slave, confirms Inquirer report a sex orgy with Prince Andrew. Now, was Bill Clinton ever in a sex orgy with Prince Andrew and Virginia Giffey is highly doubtable, probably never even came close to anything like that. But on the front pages of the National Enquirer, it said Bill caught in a teen sex ring. And now we know that not only was Donald Trump aware of that these stories were coming out, David Pecker told him personally at a meeting in Trump Tower in January of 2015, hey, watch out, sir, that there is in fact going to be a couple of stories coming out that the pictures regarding Bill Clinton and the woman on Jeffrey Epstein's island were far worse than the videos and the pictures that they had of Andrew on the island. And wow, that is a tremendous thing to give a presidential candidate or potential presidential candidate who hasn't yet even announced his campaign. But he went in front of CPAC and he told CPAC, hey, this man, Bill Clinton, he's in for some trouble. The trouble he was going to face was regarding this very serious allegations that he had been involved in Jeffrey Epstein's sex scandal. And then just after that came this headline, that Bill Clinton caught in a teen sex ring. You know, there's a lot to be said, a lot that needs to be answered by Donald Trump and by others as to how the Hillary Clinton campaign was brought down by these corrupt individuals, by David Pecker, and now that he's under a non-prosecution agreement, he should be able to clarify all of this. It certainly makes no sense to me that this was not part of the same scheme. It seems to me like it was part of the same scheme. And if it isn't, I'll take full responsibility for saying I propagated a lie. But I'm telling you, this feels to me like it's part of the same scheme. The other big thing, of course, they got Donald Trump convicted on all 34 counts was this tape, and it's worth listening to again. This is Michael Cohen recorded this tape of himself talking to Donald Trump. This is the Karen McDougal incident, but nevertheless.
So we got served from the New York Times. I told you this regarding to unseal the divorce papers with Ivana. We're fighting it. Kasowitz is going to.
You'll never be able to get that done.
Never. Kasowitz doesn't. They'll ever be able. They don't have a.
Give me a accomplice.
They don't have a legitimate purpose.
And you
so
have a woman that doesn't want to unseal.
Correct. Yes, and it's
But
all.
That's been going on for a while.
For about 2-3 weeks now.
All you have to do is delay it for.
Even after that, it's not going to ever be opened. There's no purpose for it. Told you about Charleston. I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with
So what are we going to pay?
funding. Yes, and it's all the stuff, because you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to be.
Gets it by a-
Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be.
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So
Okay.
I got.
Is that this was the smoking gun. This was the document that proved to everybody without a shadow of a doubt, this was the transfer of Michael Cohen's money that he got from his home loan account, that he withdrew from his home loan and then transferred to Stormy Daniels via her lawyer, via this private company that he'd established, an LLC. And below there, you see Alan Weisselberg scrolling and the handwriting explaining to everybody in the organization how $130,000 ballooned to $420,000, which is what Donald Trump landed up paying on behalf of the Trump organization to Michael Cohen to exercise this scheme to defraud Americans of their votes. At the end of all of this, I keep coming back to the same point over and over again. This is not about hush money. This was not about an affair. It happened in 20 years ago. It started in 20 years ago. This is not about a porn star getting hush money. This is about Americans being stolen, their votes being stolen, their election being stolen, their wishes for public office being stolen in a dramatic way in the last few weeks before the election, which is when we saw this transaction take place, when they bought off Stormy Daniels for $130,000 to keep her quiet, to keep her going on ABC News, which is what she was intending to do in the last few weeks before the elections. Instead of that, they paid her $130,000 to keep quiet. She took the money and she kept quiet. And that's why we only found out about this story much later on. We found out about the hush money payment much later on. But the key here is in the last few weeks of the election, the thing that changed probably the most, we now know, is not the GRU response to the Access Hollywood tapes, which of course was part of what drove the change in voters' desires in that last week before the 2016 election. But now we know the inside story, and it's been proven by a jury and a court that, and this prosecution, which has been phenomenal, has proven that the Stormy Daniels hush money payment was a subversion of our democracy, was an attempt to take away the vote of every American. And certainly when you think about the damage caused in the preceding 4 years, what happened to America is unbelievable in terms of the scale of damage, the amount of money taken out of our treasury, the huge amounts of debt we incurred under Donald Trump, the deaths of so many Americans, 1 million Americans in terms of coronavirus, which would never have happened had he not shut the pandemic's office, had he not been aggressive in his attempts to disregard the public statements of his health officials by suggesting that people inject themselves with bleach in order to defeat those fires. We're talking about a crazy amount of really distasteful and devastating actions taken by Donald Trump during that horrendous first term and hopefully only term as president. What he did to our international alliances, what he did to NATO, how he disgraced America in front of the world stage by that horrific appearance with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. I just think of all these terrible moments that America had to endure. The shame of those years will take years and years for all of us to get off. The stench of it all is so disgusting. The Supreme Court, which is being so co-opted and corrupted by this man, it's disgusting what he did. And here's Alvin Bragg. So we're just waiting here for him to get going. This man has a lot to say today. He should be very happy. What a name. Alvin Bragg gets to brag a lot about what happened.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course, our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
And do you plan to request a prison sentence? Donald Trump's multiple violations of the gag order that was in place should factor into that request at all?
The judge scheduled a sentencing for July 11th. We will speak in court in that time. He also set a motion schedule. We will speak in our court filings as we've done throughout this proceeding.
Donald Trump has repeatedly targeted you personally and members of your prosecution team. Do you have a response to the former president after the trial is concluded?
I do not.
In February, you decided not to bring cases against Donald Trump. You criticized that. You criticized when you vetted him in March 2023. You criticized when people really started to understand that case. How do you think of all that now, seeing the results of that, and you put that in context with your personal history?
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day in matters that you all write about, I make the press, and in lots of matters that you don't. I did my job. We did our job. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Last, Mr. Steinglass, many people said the prosecution was masterful and flawless. Just want to know how you feel at this moment. Sorry. I'll let you back. How do you feel?
Mr. Steinglass, I think some of you probably saw him speak for a little bit the other day. So he's done his job, as has this team. And he just told me, tell him how I feel. I think you said that. I will just say, enormous gratitude. Our system, I talked about the jurors at the beginning of my remarks. We have a phenomenal system. 12 everyday New Yorkers. They listen to the judge's directions. They follow the evidence. You saw them in court every day. They were careful and attentive. And so I feel deep gratitude to work alongside them, to be a part of this system. And I just want to echo that this is what we're doing every single day. During this trial, just this week, right, a ghost gun indictment, Grimaldi's wage theft, plea resolution, sex crimes, convictions, all sorts of work that's being done by phenomenal public servants. So we're before you today on this obviously consequential matter, but this is what we do every day. We follow the facts and the law without fear or favor.
The jail sentence is in the cards. It is likely that Trump and his attorneys would seek a stay on enforcement of that sentence pending appeal. If that were the scenario, would your office?
We get to the sentencing matter. I'm not going to address hypotheticals. They raise arguments. We'll respond. And I think your question really underscores an important point. This is an active, ongoing matter, right? We have other phases of this going ahead. We will continue to do our speaking about this matter, about issues like that in court.
All right, last one.
From kind of the viability of this case has been created in all sorts of media outlets all over the place, including from the defendant himself. Can you respond to any of that, how you feel now that you've gotten the conviction?
So my response, again, is I did my job. And I think particularly I talked about the history of the office, my personal history. I started as a prosecutor in 2003 in the Public Integrity Unit in the New York State Attorney General's office. I served also in the Public Integrity Unit in the Southern District of New York. These are kind of cases I've done personally, and it's a hallmark of the tradition of this office that I'm proud to lead. And I don't want to go into the whole body of litigation, but we now have a federal court decision ruling on the legal theories. We had a state court decision on the omnibus motions. But most importantly, today, we have the most important voice of all, and that's the voice of the jurors. They have spoken.
Alvin Bragg being remarkably humble in some ways by saying he was just doing his job. This is just another ordinary week for him in the life of a DA. And of course, it is just another ordinary week for him. But the consequences of this particular case are massive. There's no doubt that this is about the biggest case you can possibly imagine ever having to deal with. And Alvin Bragg, and as he pointed out there, his prosecution team did an incredible job in really nailing this case. There's no doubt in my mind, having just spent a few weeks now listening to every day of this, it is truthfully a masterclass in how to indict anybody. And they did such a remarkable job that they deserve all the credits and all the dues they are getting today, because without them, we would be entering this election with many people believing everything that Donald Trump still says about himself. Donald Trump still tells everybody that he is above the law, that he's never done anything wrong, that he's perfectly capable of continuing to be the leader of the United States, that in his case, he's completely vindicated. We know that not to be true. We know that it's, in fact, not true on many counts. We know that he's sold America's secrets to our enemies. We know that he's involved in the insurrection, that he was personally accountable for that events of that insurrection. And the court has not yet been able to adjudicate whether he was guilty of that insurrection. So instead, what we have here is this case. This is the case, the placeholder that all Americans are going to have to rely on as we head into the elections. This is the case that proves what many of us have said for 8 years now, 9 years, God knows how long it's been, that Donald Trump is what we have claimed him to be, an absolute criminal, a mobster, a man who has made his career by cooperating with the mafia, by being a mafia don, by laundering money for rogue states, by laundering money stolen out of Russia and out of other countries. He is the very epitome of a mafia mobster. And so to have him now finally found guilty in court, and this is about as big a moment as you can get in the history of the mob, of organized crime, of America, the fact that this man who was able to convince Americans by purchasing the story of Stormy Daniels that he was, worthy of the office of the president of the United States, only now we know, of course, he was not. He rigged that election with Michael Cohen, and he rigged that election with David Pecker, and with that crime, that conspiracy, is what he's been found guilty of today. But Alvin Bragg has a lot of bragging rights, if you will, today, because it is remarkable that this man who originally chose not to do this case turned around and then decided to do it. He ran for office as the DA, saying he would prosecute Donald Trump, and then he chose not to. And it was Michael Cohen's doing, if I'm not mistaken, that really cemented this for Bragg, and it's how this case came to be. And it's just a pure luck that for him, I guess, that the federal cases were so log jammed by allies of Donald Trump. And this is something we really need to investigate now. Let's assume Joe Biden can win this election, and he should and will in November. We need to understand what went on inside the Department of Justice and inside the FBI to allow for whatever's happening with Elaine Cannon down in Palm Beach, about the delay around the espionage case, the Mar-a-Lago case, and whatever's happening is in SCOTUS. Clearly, we have rogue justices who should not be on the bench. And sure, we can't get rid of Alito and Thomas, but you want to question, absolutely want to question, the 3 appointments of Donald Trump and whether they are legitimately there, considering that he was illegitimately, criminally now elected president of the United States against the will of the people by this conspiracy. How can these 3 justices remain on that bench? They no longer have the moral authority that is granted to them by the presidency. Sure, the man was sworn in as president of the United States, but he is not the president. He was not the elected president of the United States. Now that we know that he was involved in a criminal conspiracy to steal that election. So I'm digressing a little bit there, but it's worthy of comment, and it's worthy of something we're really going to have to look at, is how the Justice Department has been so horrendously corrupted in this way that those 2 important cases have not come to light, that we've not yet seen those cases come to court. And if there is a chance that we can before November, we should, because we need to know whether the man who's standing for the Republican Party as the nominee for the Republican Party is in fact a spy is willing to be selling America's deepest secrets and darkest secrets and best secrets, whatever they are, to our enemies, which he seems to have done in the case of the Mar-a-Lago espionage investigation. And we need to know, before people get to the election in November 5th, whether this man, whether Donald is going to try another insurrection should he lose the vote, which he might well do in the way things are running for him right now. So if he loses, can we expect another January where the entire country, where the entire world is waiting for the possibility that maybe he'll try another violent insurrection? How is that meant to provide any sort of confidence in the rule of law in America if things like that are not adjudicated by the Department of Justice and by the various judges? So if there's corruption to the scale that we've suspected exists in the DOJ, it needs to be absolutely investigated and rooted out. And I'd say the same for the FBI, where we continue to see evidence, including in this case, that wasn't primary to this case, but that whole email narrative that Jim Comey came out with in the last few weeks before the 2016 election. We need to understand how he was fed that information, how Jim Comey landed up being the reason, one of the reasons, that Donald Trump won the elections in 2016. The other reason is, of course, what we know now today, that Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 felony charges, a criminal conspiracy to steal the elections, to defraud Americans of their vote. And of course, now we know for sure what that was all about. Thank you for Jackie from Australia, who says she's liking the broadcast. She likes that we're giving it a different spin. I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you're here. And if anyone else is watching, feel free to share your thoughts. I'm going to just keep going because I'm so excited about today. For me, this has been a journey that is 8 years in the making. When I first started Narativ in December of 2016, it was a blog where the front page story of Narativ in 2016, I'll pull it up maybe for you in a few minutes from now, it was the Russia House. And in it, I might do it right now, actually, just because now's a good time to do some of this stuff. This was a blog that I just wanted to practice my long form writing. I was between gigs in television, and I just thought, what the hell? I'm going to just put this through. And so I started writing a blog, and I decided to cover the story of Russia at the time. I was sorry, of the Trump administration. It wasn't in my purview yet that it was Trump Russia, but it soon became apparent that it would be Trump Russia. And I have no way of actually getting to it now through this page but just to, let me get it off you. It's because of that particular decision in 2016 that I decided to write this story called The Russia House, that I landed up being now in a 9-year story arc with this thing, because this is not what I chose to do. This is not what I was intending to do at the time. I just wanted to practice my long form writing. It seemed like a good time in my career to try something new. And the Russia House story was the first story that I published on Narativ. And it was designed strictly to be a sort of a blog. It's just a blog. What turned out to be the case is that the Russia House story, which you'll now be able to see here. This story back in December of 2016, bragging rights if I have them here. Oh, this is all locked up for people who are not Patreon members, but if you're a Patreon member, you get to see this. I might be one, but I can't take you into here, unfortunately. I'll unlock it in a second. But this was December 2016, and we published this first of many posts on Narativ.org, which was the Russia House. And in that article, I argued that Donald Trump was really a stooge for Vladimir Putin, and I listed all the ways he was going to be a stooge for Vladimir Putin and all these cabinet secretaries and all the ties that he had to Vladimir Putin, and why this was in fact not a traditional White House, it was the Russia House. That got many people talking. A few years later, a few months later, I published another story called Dial C for Collusion, I think was the name of the story, where I detailed how my investigation had revealed how Donald Trump had used the internet, had used Facebook, had used social media to subvert the elections and to subvert the minds of Americans heading into that election in 2016, when he became president in January of 2017. Then I also revealed the Facebook connection and many other stories that followed, including the coronavirus story. And throughout all of that is how we led to me very early on in the blog and the pages of this blog of Narativ.org saying that Donald Trump was a clear and present danger to our union, to our republic. I still believe that today, and it's taken 9 years now to 8 years to see this man come to justice, to be in front of a judge who can finally say to America and to the world everything that we'd been saying. And it's not just me, of course, everyone on Twitter at the time, a lot of people in this community that I'm speaking to right now were involved in a sort of a grassroots civilian effort to prove that Donald Trump was not was not a good president, but it was also a danger to our society as president of the United States. That he was a person that was put there, installed by what we first thought was just Russian. And then it became apparent over the years that it wasn't just Russia, that there was more. There was the Saudi Arabians, there was the Chinese. And then that's when I came up with the idea of the notion of the enemies of democracy, which, a coalition of nation states, of hereditary dynastical networks, of religious institutions, of special interest groups, and wealthy people around the world who are working in concert with each other to destroy democracy. We know now, I believe, that is in fact what's happening. And we see the world stage shifting beneath our feet these very days. We just saw President Xi of China having a meeting with his Middle East contemporaries, his leaders from the Middle East, trying to take control of the Middle East peace process. It's something that he has set up himself. Everything that we're seeing in the Middle East has his fingerprints all over it. It's these men, Mohammed bin Salman, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu of Israel, who all conspired in 2016 to get Donald Trump elected. It's the undertold story of the entire 2016 affair. And I told it through the lens of another story you'll find in Narativ.org, is the Salvatore Mundi story. Is the story, one of the stories I revealed who this alliance was, MBS, Xi, Putin, Bibi Netanyahu, that all collaborated to bring Donald Trump to power in 2016. And that is why they are acting like they are winning the world, because they believe with Donald Trump ahead in the elections for this year, that they will win the world, that they've got no problem. That once Donald Trump is in power, they'll have carte blanche to do whatever they need to, whether it's in the Middle East, Bibi Netanyahu can continue his slaughter of innocent people in Gaza, or whether it's in MBS, who can continue to do whatever he does in Yemen, or whatever else he chooses to do around the world. And Xi Jinping can continue to be the absolutely dictatorial autocrat that he is, and continue to hold sway over all these people and take Taiwan because he just wants to take Taiwan, even though it's a democratic country. And Vladimir Putin, of course, will be able to wage war on Ukraine in an unfettered way. Putin and Xi are now locked together. Xi is promising every little bit of support that he can give him in the war in Ukraine. It's going to be a very difficult war in Ukraine coming up. And you can just imagine where he goes next, where Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping do next, if they are left unchecked as they would be if Donald Trump is the president of the United States. The only person right now who can stand in the way of these men continuing the corrupt, criminal, and authoritarian and deadly approach to the world is if they are in fact stopped by Joe Biden. And the only way Joe Biden gets to win to do that is if Joe Biden becomes the president of the United States again for a second term. Many people say to me, Joe Biden is just doing this because he's full of himself, that he's got nothing better to do. Guys, I'm sure he's got better things to do. I'm sure he'd rather just sitting at home with his grandkids. Why would you want to spend every day of your last years alive trying to fight this enemies of democracy? He's doing it because he's a great patriot. He's doing it because he believes in America, and he's the best person for the job, bar none. Because he knows these people. He knows who they are. He's got their number. He knows exactly what to do in order to disarm them. And he will do that, in my belief, if he's elected president. And that's not me being biased. That's just me telling you the news as I report it. People have accused me over the years of many things in this road since we started Narativ and became, from the blog, it became the podcast. And it got very popular as the podcast, as you'll all remember. Hopefully the people watching here will remember. And then I was attacked personally and repeatedly attacked with a bunch of lies about me and my career and my reporting. All of it is nonsense, but it was enough to remove many of my support bases, many of the people who follow me, many of the people who would fund Narativ. They all disappeared. And so I've been left a victim of this in some ways. I'm not claiming to be a victim because I'm a journalist and I just want to be able to do my job, and I continue to do my job. But this is the story. So as we see Donald Trump now found guilty on all these charges, it is good to see that there is justice left in this world, that for at least the people responsible for this are going to be held responsible for this. That we're still going to see this tyrant of a man, this Donald Trump, actually face consequences for the actions he took in 2016 when he tried to steal the elections, when he did steal the elections from Hillary Clinton and the American people. Okay, that's my spiel by myself, but I think you just keep that in mind, because there's a lot of people just like me, a lot of people, including Michael Cohen to some extent, but a lot of people who've paid an enormous price in the conviction, in the condemning, in the investigation. Many of you on Twitter, many of the people who I'm talking about here are the people who may spend many nights and hours burning away and thinking about all the different things that we could research about Donald Trump and how he could be convicted of a crime and what are the things that he's done that we can prove that he is who he said he were. That is a result of an enormous amount of work by thousands of people on Twitter who were able at the time to still connect with each other. What's happened since Elon Musk has taken over is he's torn that community apart. There's just no way for us to reach the same number of people in the way we used to. There's no ways to coordinate the way we used to. But for the time being there in 2016 into 2017, this network that we are on right now, this Twitter operation that we're on right now, was a remarkable tool of civil organization. I can always describe it as a sort of a civic guard that people stood up, used their research powers, used the internet, used Twitter to absolutely research and conclude. We concluded very early on and well before anybody else that Donald Trump was a criminal, was a Russian asset, was working for other people in Vladimir Putin's universe. And that is how, come full circle, it's the Russia House that ended up being the term for the presidency between 2016 and 2020. And I urge you all, the chapters in Narativ.org are always a good read. They're always a good read. I go back every once in a while and I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? We went back all that way. And so much terrific work by so many people. All right, so I've been on for a little bit now. I'm going to continue talking because I've just got a desire to talk today. So I hope you don't mind me if I just continue to wax lyrical a little bit. A couple of updates that have come through since we started. We know Trump has been found guilty. That's true, of all 34 counts. By the way, the conviction on all 34 counts is for falsifying business records. That's what the opposition, the Fox News folks, are going to say. Hey, what is this? You're going to do that to the president of the United States, falsifying business documents, as if that's a crime that the president of the United States should be damaged for or convicted for. As it turns out, as we've been pointing out this evening, it's not just the crime, it's the effect of the crime, the fact that he stole the democracy, he stole the votes and the will of the people in 2016 and allowed Hillary Clinton to be defeated by his feeding of false information, by his burying of the story around Stormy Daniels. That is how Donald Trump became president. July 11th is the sentencing date, and we certainly are interested in hearing from you what you think that might be. How long do you think he's going to get sentenced for? Is there an actual specific amount? It could be anything. Sometimes they say 4 years. I've heard that, but he's not going to get sentenced to jail. I can't imagine him going to jail. Just the coordination of that would be a nightmare. And it's not something you necessarily want the former president to be involved in. But certainly house arrest is within the realm of this court, and the judge will determine how long he should be in prison for. Now, there'll be appeals. That's the problem. That's not a problem. It's these rights to have appeals. And there'll be appeals not only coming up, so there'll be a first mention of an appeal and then others coming up down the line. But regardless, what we're seeing is that Donald Trump is now a felon. There's nothing else that can be said about that. And how that factors into the 2024 election race is anyone's guess. But I believe that it's another crack in the incredible echo chamber that the enemies of democracy have built up in the United States. They've been able to chip away at rational thoughts and certainly reduce the voices of those of us who believe that Donald Trump is who he is and suppress our voices. But they can't do that forever. And in fact, what we're going to see, I think, in the next few weeks is that the Fox News universe and the Newsmax universe is going to have to come to terms with how they explain to Americans what their presidential choice, their big nominee for the Republican Party, what he in fact did in 2016, because this needs to be explained. We need to understand how he got to steal the election so it doesn't happen again. And these 34 counts, they may just say falsifying business records, but they reveal an attempt to subvert democracy, to steal an election from Hillary Clinton. It's important stuff. The effects on this election is going to be monumentous, I believe, and I think hopefully this stuff starts to break through in Republican circles, because it's one thing for me to sit here and talk about it. It's one thing many of you can sit here and talk about this stuff any way you want to, but it's completely different when you're actually talking to the people in the Republican Party and actually trying to convince them. It's very different when you're trying to convince those people in the Republican Party. Hopefully this message gets through to the Republicans because it's important. Trump is a felon. He's still the nominee for the Republican Party in the 2024 elections. It's important that everybody starts speaking out and explaining to everyone in your life and any doubters that they might exist how serious and consequential today has been that in fact, the former president is convicted of a serious crime, not just falsifying business documents, that he is in fact guilty of subverting our democracy, that he is in fact guilty of all 34 of those cases, and that he can't pardon himself. Because even if he wins, he can't pardon himself. These are state laws. And the fact that he's guilty in one crime that he said he never did, perhaps it's time to really believe him or believe us when we say that he's guilty of many crimes that he keeps denying. The truth is he's done all these things and more. It's quite a remarkable history of criminal activity that he's done over decades and decades with these criminal cohorts like Rudy Giuliani and others that have cost American lives, that have cost American money, that have cost us all a little bit of our freedom. And Donald Trump has a lot to answer for. His allies around the world, like Bibi Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, Xi Jinping, like Vladimir Putin, have also got to answer for that, because what they did along the way with Donald Trump by using him as an ally is ultimately weaponize him to be used against America when he became president. And that's in fact what happened. And it should not be stood for. Certainly none of these countries would appreciate anyone being installed in their government as leaders. And it certainly seems like now it's okay if America did that to Russia or did that to China or did that to Saudi Arabia. At the end of the day, if this is what they did to America, and we now have it as proven in court by a jury, and there's no doubt about it, it's been proven now, then there's repercussions for Vladimir Putin, Bibi Netanyahu, and for Xi Jinping, and also Mohammed bin Salman. It's not going to go unnoticed that they were involved in that scheme in 2016 to elect Donald Trump the president of the United States. This is the most key thing I keep impressing upon everyone, is the enemies of democracy conspired in 2016 to overthrow the will of the people by electing Donald Trump. I've written extensively about this, about how the Israelis used their independent private intelligence groups to subvert the elections. These were people working on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu, but not directly for Bibi Netanyahu. They were funded by Russians, by Viktor Vekselberg, amongst others. Someone Michael Cohen certainly has connections to. And that the elections were subverted based on their attempts to control social media through social media manipulation, through artificial intelligence, through many other ways that the Israelis and others have become very good at interfering in American politics and American sentiment. That is how we landed up with the 2016 election that was so close between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton would have been a fine president. Instead, we got Donald Trump, the disaster for 4 years. And in that presidency caused so much damage. But we can't forget how he got there. And in this particular case, we found out that he got there because of his purchase of a story from Stormy Daniels, that he had this illicit contract with David Pecker of the American Media Inc., with the National Enquirer, to absolutely damage the institution of the presidency by subverting the will of the people and electing Donald Trump and conspiring in this way that they did to conspire to win the election in 2016. I've mentioned Mohammed bin Salman, I've mentioned some others, and I'll get back to my closing point in just a second. But I've also said to you today, and in my most recent broadcast, that there is not a lot of distance between Mohammed bin Salman and American Media Inc. This particular thing came out in March 2018. So no one can really explain it. The most influential leader transforming the world at 32 heralded this magazine, I guess is what you'd call it, published by the good people at the American Media Inc. The National Enquirer team put this together. The new kingdom, it heralded. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meet the next king. I wonder if he will be. And then you've got the Saudi Vision 2030, what they hope to make of Saudi Arabia by 2030. He's only got 6 years to go, and I don't know if he's getting anywhere near that. Plus, it talks about America's Saudi Arabia being an ally against the fight of terrorism. What nonsense is that? Controlling the staggering $4 trillion business empire. Yes, he controls it all because it's an autocracy. It's disgusting. No one else is allowed to do anything. And whenever he wants, he just goes and arrests all the CEOs, steals money from them, improving the lives of his people, and even suggests that there's improved women's rights in Saudi Arabia, which they might be, but certainly not because he's that much of a feminist or anything like that, just because he's tried to subvert to the opposition there. But that's another aside. My point here really is that Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman are intimately linked with the American Media Inc., which is David Pecker's organization, which runs the National Enquirer, and that they published this, frankly, propaganda piece in 2018 about him. No one knows how or why they decided to do it, but they did. And what's really fascinating is that not long after that, we found out that Mohammed bin Salman got the phone number of Jeff Bezos over dinner, the head of Amazon, and Jeff Bezos kindly gave him the number, only to find out that he'd later been hacked using the Pegasus software. And that led this was the cover story of the National Enquirer, from the hacked information that Mohammed bin Salman likely placed on Jeff Bezos' phone. That's how we got to this National Enquirer expose showing the cheating photos that ended his marriage, Jeff Bezos' current girlfriend, and how he's led to divorce. It all came from Mohammed bin Salman's connections to David Pecker, because that is what we're seeing here with this new kingdom, maybe a bit of propaganda piece, and then this quid pro quo maybe, where we're seeing Bezos' divorce on the front page of the National Enquirer. And that is how the Stormy Daniels thing really led up to what the prosecutors have called the subversion of democracy, which is where we are today. So this is a guilty verdict that is not just about falsifying documents. Now, we still have the jurors. We would want to hear from them. I'm sure they will speak at some point. Donald Trump has certainly gone back home. He has a lot to think about how he can navigate his way through this, and his backers are going to have a lot to think about. Are they really going to go for a president who is a convict, who's got so many other criminal convictions standing in their way? Is this guy really going to rule America? Is it even possible that he can be the president of the United States if he has these continuing trials that he has to go through? And certainly one of the things that Americans should insist on is, if he becomes president, that he won't stop these trials, that he will still continue to allow the Department of Justice to be independent, that he can't shut these down. Just because he says he can doesn't mean we should stand for it. He should certainly promise, along the way, that he will absolutely not interfere in the electoral process, the judicial process. I don't expect it, but he'll answer yes to that. But we need to have this, and we'll find out in the debate, which is going to be just fascinating to watch. I'm not even sure he's going to make the debate, to be honest. And if they landed with Nikki Haley, careful with Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley is not who we think she is, and I'll reveal more about that in the coming weeks. We know a lot about Nikki Haley and about where she gets her money and her support, and it's not going to be any better. We've all lived through the surreal experience today. We've all lived the surreal experience, which is like a absolute manifestation of 8 years or 9 years of many of us trying very hard to bring justice back to America, to save democracy, to help return the rule of law to America. It is wonderful to get to the point now where we can feel somewhat vindicated that the rule of law is back. We know that when someone commits a crime, no matter who they are, they'll face the consequences. That to me is such a key thing. I felt so missing in everything in America. Is this it's every bit of our moral compass has been pulled away from us, that everything that we thought was right has been wrong in the last 8 years, and obviously much better under Biden than Trump, but still the assault has continued by the enemies of democracy. And we have to return to a state of normalcy, and we have to regain control of our country. We have to regain control of justice. And I hope everyone does that, takes that job seriously. Now that we know that there's a criminal conviction, likely there's more. Let's keep this wave going. Let's make sure that Donald Trump does not get to be the president of the United States again. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye, because I've been talking for so long. It's been a really interesting, exciting afternoon to be with you. I've never done a live broadcast just by myself, just talking like this for so long. I've done it for a couple of hours, but never for this long. So I apologize for the technical challenges I've had, but it's good to be here with you on this day. It's good to be here with you every day in the last 8 years. Without you, I don't think I would have had the courage to continue doing all this. It takes a lot out of me every time we put out a big story and these guys come after me, knowing that I have your support, as I hope I continue to have. Please, if you can support Narativ by going to patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative. If you're a subscriber, it'll allow you to access our entire archive on narrative.org. You can also get access to our archive through Substack, narrative.substack.com, narrative.substack.com. In most cases, it's $8 that a month that we ask for people to contribute, and it goes to covering whatever costs I have. And I don't make a lot of money out of that, barely a couple of $1,000s a month, but it's enough to keep me alive, and that's all I care about right now as we try to march towards a victory in November, but also in January, when Donald Trump is defeated and Joe Biden is again reelected, so we can return the world and the rule of law to where it needs to be. That's really what we're aiming for here on Narativ. It's always been about the truth. That's why we say the truth lives here. And so thank you very much for watching tonight and every night when we're on the air. You'll see a lot more of me going ahead as we head towards November. I'll leave you with this final thought as I'm putting it out this week. We're doing this thing called split screen, where we're showing you what the difference is between these two candidates. That's the difference. Look at all these policies. There are so many policies that you can just see are so different between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and how important it is that we elect Joe Biden, the president of the United States. All right, that's my show for tonight, everybody. Have a good night. You know what? If you're still there, I'm going to say one more thing before you go away, because I can't believe I almost ended the show without our signature goodbyes. This is one of my favorite things I've done in the last few years, ever since we started on Narativ. This is the videotape that I originally created about Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 elections. It has stood the test of time. 4 years later, it remains my anthem, my theme to the show, and I hope you'll enjoy as we play back on this very auspicious day. The Odyssey is what I call it, and it's about Narativ, so it's the Narativ Odyssey for 20.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.